They get you guaranteed early access to all.
And I guess it's time. So we're going to start the workshop right now. Welcome to the second workshop for design. We're going to be covering mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetic framework. So let's begin. So first of all, can someone tell me what is a framework, just in general?
Because those are both
Things happening each second.
another.
Like 6.
Oh, that would be framework as like when you're working in some sort of project or you're trying to build something.
As far as the.
Oh, it's like your outline for everything?
Yes, it's like an outline. Yeah. Any other opinions? Any other?
Structures
Like the rating.
Yes.
of the work you need to do.
Yes.
Kind of.
By the way, you wanna add anything?
Oh, yeah.
Do you wanna add to it? What is framework? Yeah.
I think they got it.
Yeah.
So like-
Yeah. So yeah, basically, framework is like the blueprint that you have of a project that you're working on, right? It's like the that covers, like it says, that covers all the components of the game. So the question comes to mind: games are very complex systems, right? That they have so many parts to it. You have art, you have design, you have they're just very complex things, right? So is it possible to have a framework for games? And these people, what was their names? LeBlanc. You know what? Well, there's 3 researchers who came out with the MDA framework. We actually does that. It helps understand what, how to dissect and put apart all the components that make a video game in a way that is easier for us designers to build. So, I guess I was ahead of myself. So yeah, that is the MDA framework, which MDA stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics, which we're gonna get to right now. And yeah, you use them to, you can basically use this framework to analyze either, any game, and you can basically deconstruct slowly, putting pieces apart, and getting more into more detail of what makes a game and how it will feel and like the decisions to play. Any questions, concerns, or anything? Feel free to raise your hand at any moment and I will get to you. So why is MDA useful? So it formalizes the construction of games by breaking them into their distinct components. So a game can be broken up into rules, systems, and fun. And so from the player's perspective, those are like the components that a game is structuring. Well, for us designers, we can break that into mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Yep. So aesthetics. Aesthetics describes the desirable emotional response evoked in the player when she or he interacts with the game system. So does anybody have any idea of any example of aesthetics? Yeah.
Discovery.
Discovery, yeah, definitely.
Narrative.
Yes, narrative.
What specific?
We just went over this in ICS 60.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So think about it right there, like emotional response.
Like the drama of like interacting with other characters in the game.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Failure.
Yeah, favorite.
Fantasy.
Fantasy, yes, that's what they're doing too.
Triumph.
Yeah.
Exploration.
Yes. Can you guys tell me for examples of games in attention to a specific aesthetic? Anybody just name a game?
Dark Souls.
That's
exactly what I was thinking.
Alright.
Alright, so what do you think is the aesthetics of Dark Souls?
Pain and suffering.
Yeah, that's right? That's the emotional response that you might get from Dark Souls. Yeah. Anything else?
Wind Waker, you're wearing a Zelda shirt.
Okay.
It's just mostly like exploration and challenge and narrative.
Yeah, and fantasy as well, like you said, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Even horror games, like Last of Us.
yeah.
Oh, they bring a horror experience, make the player feel scared the entire time.
So, I have like a list, and you guys already touched pretty much almost all of them: fantasy, narrative, challenge, sensation, fellowship in social frameworks, discovery, expression, submission. So yeah, any sort of emotional response that the player gets that can be classified as an aesthetic. So dynamics. the game's behaviors or scenarios that the player is exposed to in runtime. The aesthetic experience is created by a combination of dynamics. So every dynamic, like we talked, every experience, like frustration, fantasy, discovery, are all created due to a combination of dynamics. So does anybody have an idea of a dynamic?
Dark Souls again.
But yeah, but what would be the dynamic?
Like
One of the
those
dynamics.
balls are so hard to fight, and
Yeah.
like there's a really great distance between your ability and the boss's ability, so very really challengeable.
Yeah, so like a pressure challenge.
Yeah,
right?
pressure challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, always for all of us.
That's correct.
Just adding to the Dark Souls thing is that when you die, you have that whole mechanic where you have to go back to get your souls, and sometimes it's in that same area where you just died to that boss or something. So there's that initial, you have to get back to that path, and there's always danger in there. And then when you get back to that boss, you have to try grabbing your stuff before you get killed again, and then try to relearn from all your past mistakes and try to execute flawlessly one last time.
To rephrase it more for dynamics, yeah, it will be like the feeling of you only got one shot, so it has like pressure, right? Because if you fail at this, you lost your souls forever. So yeah, you cannot add to the stakes of it. So yeah.
I guess for Dark Souls, infrequent save points.
Okay.
Like, there's like long distances between each save checkpoint or save point in that game.
Can you elaborate a little more?
I haven't played Dark Souls.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, also in Dark Souls, like if you hit an NPC and you die, they remember.
Oh, okay.
And they will fight you.
Yeah, so that's definitely yeah. Can somebody come with one that is not Dark Souls? Right, what about Pac-Man?
With Pac-Man, you have only a certain number of lives, and you really don't want to lose those lives by getting touched by the ghost.
Okay. So, what type of dynamic does that mean? I mean, what type of aesthetic does that mean?
Not sure.
Challenge.
Yeah.
It's challenging because, you only have a couple lives.
In the newest, or I guess the recent release, that's not recent, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, the whole, there's a mechanic that they offer to you, which is the slow-mo time, and the entire reason that they add it is to give you that kind of sense that you're playing as this ultimate soldier, so that even though you do mess up, you're given like one last shot to kind of redeem yourself in that stealth scenario before everything, like, all hell breaks loose.
So the sensation part is the dynamic.
Yeah.
of that, yes.
I'd say like everything about Persona 5, like specifically like how menus work, like how dynamic, like literally how dynamic it is, how like all the movement is geared towards the aesthetic of freedom and rebellion.
Sean, you wanna add?
So I believe we discussed this earlier, but you mentioned how it's scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like how the player, in a certain period in the game, uses those mechanics to create an experience. So for instance, like the example I learned in my ICS 60 class is the idea of a bomb, or like rocket jumping, where a bomb was normally used to just damage enemies, but you use it to boost yourself up more, which is something that sometimes the mechanic is used in ways that's not intended to.
We haven't talked about mechanics yet.
Yeah.
So we cannot find mechanics yet.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, you're recording.
Yes, I'm recording. Ryan, do you have an example of the mechanics?
An example of a dynamic. I'm sure I do.
Okay. That's great.
I mean, a really classic dynamic, right, is anytime that you're running low, or anytime where you have a resource system and you either are building up a plethora of that resource, or you're building up or you're running a deficit of that resource, right? Because that is a situation that is arising out of the entire game, is coming together either to make your resource run really, really down, really, really fast, or to make it keep flowing up and exploding on top of itself. Right, and that's feeding directly into, if your money and you're investing in things and reaping in giant capital and reinvesting and reaping in giant capital and building your empire, right, that's really feeding directly into your aesthetic of, my goodness, look at all my money. And if you're doing the exact opposite of that, where you're having to spend things, right, if you're having to fix problems, which is costing you money, and then more problems come up, and you're having to spend your money to fix that, and you're constantly running down and running down your money, and you're running down your money pool, right? That's feeding directly into the aesthetic of, oh no, I'm trapped, what do I do?
I have an
Yeah, go on.
I have an example that doesn't use mechanics now.
Okay.
So, I believe in the game Assassin's Creed, they have a health bar, and the reason why I bring this up is it brings into the aesthetic of like you're a badass assassin, right? You can fight like 1 versus like 8 people.
Yeah.
But there are scenarios where when you get really low, the screen gets all gray, and now it's kind of like, oh shoot, I'm dying. But it's supposed to bring out that inner part of you that's like super badass, and like you can combo and you can counter people and all that good stuff.
You can like get out of a tough scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got a classic example too in Sonic when you have to run fast in order to clear some areas. So that dynamic creates like an aesthetic of like I don't know, running fast.
Yeah, it definitely brings like this, like, gotta go fast, right? So yeah, it's like, for example, what's another example for Sonic? I don't know. I haven't played that many Sonic games. I don't know if it works like Mario, but for example, they can use the like in Mario, right? You use the coins to guide you to like specific paths. So I'm pretty sure Sonic does that too. That following the rings take you to like very specific routes, a way to complete the level that really gives you this feeling of.
They had a game. Okay, they had a game where Sonic turned into a werewolf.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Half the levels were like him running around and punching things, and I think that dynamic did not work as a Sonic game, just because like Sonic is all about running and like suddenly turned into a platformer.
And super slow.
Yeah, and it's like
clunky.
So she brings something really important with that, and is that dynamics need to work together to create an aesthetic, and like that's something that we should really be careful about when we're designing games. It's like you need to combine many scenarios, right, to ultimately create some sort of purpose or experience into the player, right? So yeah, that's something to really keep in mind. Anything else? Questions, concerns, comments? Yes?
another example. In Ratchet and Clank, you can get the I forgot what it's called, but it's like the ultimate weapon that you can get that basically kills anything in one move. It's like the OP weapon, and if you get it, it's really hard to get it, but if you get it at the end of the game, you can just like basically marathon your way through it. So like that is also fun, because now the challenging things are not as challenging anymore.
Nice.
I do have a question. Is there a difference between dynamics and systemic? Like systemic gameplay, for example?
Can you elaborate on systemic?
So systemic gameplay is something like where two different systems in the game interact in a way that might not be foreseen by the developers, but they still kind of leave it in so that it offers like a challenge to the player, or something that the player does causes like this specific chain reaction, and it offers gameplay past what is initially given for the player to do.
Like emerging gameplay?
Yeah.
If you don't have an answer to that, I do.
I kind of do, but I don't know if it's as good as yours. I will go for it.
Go for it.
But basically, I think there's a key difference between those two. This one is intentional. We as designers know that we're creating a dynamic, like the example that you said before, to tie up an experience, right? While the what do you call it? The
Systemic, or I guess better to be emergent.
Yeah, that is just like a combination of dynamics that create our unexpected behavior. So that kind of goes back to Sean's example of the bomb, using it for another action that was not the intended one. And this is quite common because it goes up to like especially now that we have systematic games in which like everything can interact with everything, kind of like in Breath of the Wild and things like that. So I don't think it's quite the same, but it does bring like very different intentions or feelings, and that's good because it adds to like the element of surprise, or the player feels more empowered because they can solve things in their unique way. So I think they are kind of different.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say they are definitely different. I wouldn't go far as to say is that like an emergent piece of gameplay isn't a dynamic. I think you can make a pretty compelling case, right? That like, when I giant growth my Cyclops and then fling my Cyclops at your face, that will make sense to Magic players.
Yeah.
Right? That's not an intended thing, but I would still call that a dynamic, right? That is an interaction of the entire game, right? All these cards coming together to create a very particular experience of throwing a Cyclops at someone's face, which I guess would be an aesthetic of laugh out loud funny. But like, you know, on top of that, I would still call that a dynamic, but I wouldn't call all dynamics emerging gameplay, because, you know, I think, as Lou's very accurately pointed, most dynamics are very intentional, right, and curated and manufactured. Not to say that, and I wouldn't go so far to say as emerging gameplay isn't intentional or isn't manufactured to some degree, right? Most designers do have a pretty good idea of what kind of gameplay is emergent. I would say emerging gameplay is a particular approach to design that's kind of built around the idea of just getting an exponential number of dynamics happening, right? As opposed to other games where you're just like designing around a very few choice dynamics.
Oh, I don't know. I just found this interesting. In Dungeons and Dragons, like the Dungeon Master is also basically a game designer, because they're given mechanics they use to create dynamics, and their challenge is to like make the game balanced. Because if you put a bunch of enemies there that kill all your like player characters, it's not a good game. But also if it's too easy, it's like, oh, it's too easy, and that it's not challenging enough. And like also just like interacting. So Dungeons and Dragons is like basically not really a full-fledged game, but more like a set of mechanics that you can use, I think.
Yeah, and that's you point out a really important thing is like balance, right? Like, yes, you can put all these dynamics and make, for example, Dark Souls, right? Going back to the example, because we all know Dark Souls. Enemies in Dark Souls, you know, one may argue was their intention, right? Because the game is supposed to be hard, right? The game is supposed to make people frustrated. But the best way to do that would be to make all the AIs extremely overpowered and you impossible to beat them. That would create the same irritation aesthetic, but that's not the right way to do it, right? Like, there has to be some sort of fairness to it. There has to be some sort of play with the player and the designer. And it goes back with Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, if you have someone who just kills you off, that might give you an aesthetic, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good, right? There has to be a balance with the dynamics to make this feel fair and to ultimately give you a fun experience, right? That's the point of a game, to give you some sort of like feedback in that way.
I mean, first of all, everything she said about DMing being an amazing, like DMing being game design is spot on. DMing is straight up game design. If you want to practice game design, go become a DM. So I would disagree though on the point of balancing. Like, my personal motto when it comes to balancing games is that balancing is the line editing of game design. It is very important, and if you don't do it, your game is going to be messy and ugly, but it is the afterthought. It is the polish, right? It in itself has very little value, right? No one's going to look at a paper and say, oh my god, they spelled everything correctly. And I kind of have the same approach to the role of balancing, right? Like, I wouldn't say in Dark Souls the balancing has value. I would say when Dark Souls has value is the fact that it creates the right aesthetic. Because I would argue that getting crushed by a boss that is so overpowered that you have no chance of beating it, and then on the flip side, getting beaten by a boss that you have a chance at beating, are very different aesthetics. One is, oh my god, this is dumb, I'm wasting my time. The other one is, oh my god, the mountain is so high, but I will overcome this. Right? I would say those are very different aesthetics, and the value in the ending, or the value in the balance doesn't come through in the fact that, oh my god, this is so fair. It comes through in, oh my god, I will overcome this. Right? Yes?
Yeah, I just remember this. Good example of like dynamics is Getting Over It. Rennie's playing that one. It's basically a game that's meant to give you frustration, and the whole challenge is just to keep going and keep playing it, and not just like quit. So the game is purposefully broken in like the balance sense for the sake of its aesthetic.
Exactly, right? Balance just serves the rest of the game. It is not valuable in itself. Getting Over It is an amazing game despite not being balanced, because it's not supposed to be balanced.
Questions? No? Okay. I guess we move to mechanics. So mechanics describes the core components of the game at the level of data representation in algorithm, but focus more on it is the actions, behaviors, and control mechanisms for it to deploy everything in a game context. So to put that simple, it is each individual action that you make in a game. So does anybody have any examples?
The AI in the first Halo game, which like at the time was like considered really high end, and just like the amount of deliberate kind of like almost randomness they put into the AI, and like just how much they fine tuned it, fed into the dynamics of very satisfying gameplay that also fed the aesthetics.
Anyone else have an idea about mechanics?
Portals.
Portals? Yeah, definitely. That's a really good one, right? It's a very concentrated verb. Like it is just, yeah, like teleporting from one place to another, because that gives birth to dynamics, right? It gives birth to a scenario in which something funny may happen, or you might like solve a puzzle, which that will give birth to an aesthetic. That will be like a pleasure or like satisfaction that you finished this puzzle, or that you overcame this wall.
The 2016 Doom's glory kill mechanic.
Yes.
I love that.
Like it inspires that consistent push forward, never stop killing, keep going, and just rip and tear everything you get your hands on. Because the entire glory kill mechanic gives you health and gives you ammo, so it encourages you to consistently keep doing that.
Yeah. So to add more context to that, yeah, because when you play a first-person shooter, right? When they were building Doom, they thought about what they wanted to do is they wanted to make an experience in which you feel that you're awesome and you're empowered and you can go and beat all these monsters, right? However, the problem is that in most first-person shooters, right, the player not always does what the designers want them to do. The players does what has higher chance of succeeding. That's just common nature for players to do, and we as designers have to have always that in mind, because it doesn't matter how epic it can be to beat something head on. The players, if they're able to do it in a safe way by either camping or slowly killing opponents one by one and running away, they will go for that option. So the mechanic that he brought up, the glory kill, it was a great choice because it forces you kind of to go and confront your opponents head on, because it actually heals you, and that will add to the dynamic of of like feeling empowered and which adds to the aesthetic of like feeling awesome.
And it was also, I think, a point where before they added the glory kill mechanic, they were trying to prevent the players from doing what you mentioned earlier, where the player will often try to do the most effective thing, even if it's not fun. Because initially, when they were programming many of the enemies, they made them take cover and made them have a little bit more damage. And players would immediately upon entering an arena, would immediately backpedal, which was exactly the opposite of what they wanted them to do. So they made a lot of the AI start to rush the player or stand their ground, so the player would have that incentive to start rushing them instead.
So on Doom, I think this might be an example of dynamics, but the last bits of your health are actually worth more than when you're at full health. So when you at the end of the fight, when you just have barely enough health, you feel more like a badass to like barely survive it.
I think that can be considered a mechanic, because in the core action of that is that the health is lying to you, right? Like if you look at the algorithms, and if you could look at the code, you actually have more health than what it appears to be.
That's the thing in Assassin's Creed that I mentioned.
Okay.
That little last bit of health is actually 50%.
Yeah, because see, like that adds to the dynamics, right? It makes you feel that you're about to die and you're in this very pressure-like scenario, right? Which will add to the aesthetic of the game. Okay, great example.
In Warframe, there's a lot of parkour and like free-running style mechanics that can allow for dynamics like there's like really fun battle systems and fast movement. It makes you feel like you're more powerful.
Yeah, you go back to like combining many actions, right, or mechanics to give birth to dynamics. This dynamic will be the scenario of you actually doing parkour, right, by running, jumping, doing all that type of stuff.
I'm not sure if this is a mechanic, but in the Uncharted series, when your character comes out of cover to shoot, the first few shots will always miss before hitting you. Is that considered a mechanic?
Yeah, definitely. That's an action. Yeah. How do you think you can connect that to dynamics?
It's you're usually playing as some sort of treasure hunter or like a suave bounty hunter of some kind, so that's supposed to give you that kind of invincible feel.
Yes.
I would point out that that is very 100% correct. I would note that one of the keys ways to tell, because dynamics are kind of weird and they're kind of fuzzy and they blur into aesthetics and mechanics. If you ever find yourself saying the word feel or comparing it to real world things, you're probably talking about an aesthetic, not a dynamic.
And I was gonna add to that right before that because if you think about it, if they will shoot at you and they will kill you instantly, right? That will give you an emotion that is kind of like frustration, right? And that's what they didn't want, right? They wanted you to feel like this treasure hunter, right? So yeah, it like just looking at the aesthetic of it, you will come up with some kind of ideas.
You have the mechanic in, I think it's a mechanic in XCOM where you have the chance to hit whenever you fire one of your weapons.
Yeah, that's a mechanic. Yeah.
And it also feeds into dynamics because it makes you either feel really good or really frustrated.
Feeling.
Oh, aesthetic.
Yes, and then it will be like the reason.
So this may be a bit of an old school example, but in the 1990-ish game of Active Express, there was a mechanic that it was a point-and-click adventure game, but it was all on a timer. So you played as a detective, but you were timed the entire way through. So it kind of made players, instead of just banging their head against the puzzle over and over again, since they were on a time limit and they knew it, they would be like, okay, well, if I can't do this, I'll come back to it later and work on something else because I can't waste my time doing this.
Yeah, so that mechanic refers to different dynamics, right? And it kind of forces the player to play this game in a specific way.
Yeah.
And that should be always like our train of thought, right? We are supposed to guide the player into playing the game in the way that we decided to play the game.
Air dashes for like either fast-paced gameplay or like dodge-heavy gameplay, depending on what game it's in.
Yeah, air dashes. Yeah, it's I would say that it also has like a level of complexity. For example, in fighting games like Super Smash Bros., right? You have attack and you have shield, but with the action of dodging now, like it becomes more of it goes a higher level of strategy because now you have more options, which goes further with the aesthetic, right? It makes you feel that you are actually thinking more about the game. You have more options, and it's like more strategy based.
Going off of what you just brought up with Super Smash Brothers, one mechanic specifically to Melee was like directional air dodging, but then it was like kind of twisted by the community rather than the developers into like wave dashing and stuff, right? But to counter that in the next game going forward, Brawl, they implemented tripping, and that mechanic alone like set the tone for like the aesthetics of both games and the dynamics as well. Like one was now, instead of the party game is intended to be a competitive fighting game that the community created, but Brawl would turn into a joke almost.
I'm a little hesitant to touch this, but this touches something very important that we're going to cover in the future workshops, and it's called pillars. So every game has pillars, which in summary is a game has, it doesn't matter where you look into a game or which part of the game you're looking at, pillars are things that will always be true about the game. So for Smash Brothers, the pillar will be competition, but it will also be family friendly in a way. And I think Smash has this problem that the game itself is kind of like dividing into two, right? Because you have the demographic of, when they made the game, right, they wanted to make a fighting game that everybody will be able to play and have fun with, right? But at the same time, people started playing it competitively, so they started to also consider that demographic. So in respect to Brawl, right, the tripping part was to encourage ultimately the pillar of family friendly, right? Which would just add to the randomness of the game and everybody having fun, which goes back to an aesthetic, right? While DIing would be something more, because they never really teach you about DI, right? It's just through playing a lot that you get this experience. So that was an action that actually encouraged the other pillar, which was competitiveness. So yeah, so there's, definitely, like at that point it's like, we go from the pillars and the aesthetics of the game all the way to these little components that may boost one or another purpose.
Fun bonus question, what is wave dashing?
An export.
You have three options. Is it a mechanic, a dynamic, or an aesthetic?
Dynamic.
Yay! Yes. It's an unintentional dynamic because it was actually a bug. They never meant to do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which goes back to the systematic, not the
emergent.
Yeah, because it was putting two actions together that created this dynamic that the programmers or the designers never saw coming, which helped the fast pace of the game, which helped to the aesthetic value of competitiveness.
I guess like wave dashing isn't really a bug, it's more like an edge case, because anytime you land on the ground, you have to do something. You can either choose to ignore it, you can like land on the ground, or whatever, yeah. So when you air dodge into the ground, it has to have some case. So either ignore it or have you land on the ground. And then you chose to make it land you on the ground.
Yeah, because that adds more options right into the game, so that goes back into enforcing the strategy or like the fast pace of how fast you can press many buttons, right? Comments, concerns, questions? So using the MDA as lens. So each component of the MDA framework can be thought of a lens or a view of the game. So as we have been having this discussion, we have seen that we can observe games through either through mechanics, through dynamics, and through aesthetics, and we can see how each one of them can connect to one another, and we can find really important things about the game by just looking at them one at a time or as a whole. This also can help, for example, if you're making a game and you really know what type of aesthetics you want to get into the game, right? Like you really want the player to feel overpowered, right? And have this like ideal like awesomeness, but you don't know what type of mechanics you want to have in the game, right? So then you can just go little by little and think about dynamics, right? Think what type of actions I can make that will make me have this aesthetic, right? Which will go, for example, back to Doom, right? Like rushing into the enemy, right? And then you think about, okay, how can I do that? We create a mechanic that forces you, or that you're able to go and get health from the monsters by killing them. So from the designer's perspective, the mechanics give rise to dynamic system behaviors, which leads to particular aesthetic experiences, right? While for the player's perspective, the aesthetic sets the tone due to observable dynamics, which origin from operable mechanics. So I have like a picture right here that helps kind of represent this. So when a player gets a game, what they're gonna first grasp is the aesthetics. They're gonna first experience whatever you are giving them with the aesthetics, and then the dynamics, and then the mechanics. While we as designers usually can approach it from the other way around. We can do mechanics to then create dynamics, to then create experiences. Some designers argue that it can be the other way around. That's fine. Just when they did the research, they thought of it this way, but either way can work. Like, there's definitely something you can learn from designing a game and starting from aesthetics, going to dynamics, and going to mechanics, or going the other way around. Any questions, concerns,
You don't want the average
comments?
You want the average number of tasks.
What are we in time? 3:33. What else do we have? Ooh. Sean, do you want to add anything else?
To the previous slide, let me, I feel like I had something for this. So yeah, you mentioned how there's an argument on doing aesthetics first before making dynamics and mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
I have talked to some of the CGS faculty, and when I did ask them like design questions, they did kind of agree with going for the experience of the game more than the mechanics of the game, since like they do want players to walk away with an experience, and that's not always easy to do if you work with the mechanics first. So that's just something I remembered.
Yeah, I guess to add to Sean wording too is that you should focus more on the aesthetic. Like aesthetic is like your ultimate goal, right? Don't focus on making many mechanics first, in a way, like because having a lot of mechanics doesn't mean equal good, right? Just because you're adding many mechanics that give the same impression doesn't necessarily mean that the player will have this experience. So it's kind of like you always have to look back at the aesthetics, because again, it goes back to that the player will never first look at the mechanics and then aesthetics, that's for sure. You can change around as a designer, but the player will always look at the aesthetics first. They will always question when they play the game what this game makes them feel. That's the first thing that they will think about. So then as a designer, you should keep that in mind and think about whenever you're building the mechanics and dynamics, and it doesn't matter how many you make, to go back and think if this is worthwhile based on the aesthetics that you're trying to evoke in the player.
Just a little, since we're near the end, I have a little question for you guys. So, just anyone want to volunteer and say a game that they remember the most?
Skyrim.
Skyrim?
Undertale.
Undertale. Okay, next question. Oh, wait, what?
No,
okay. Next question. What made the game so memorable?
Skyrim. I can do everything I want in the game. I can, yeah.
It gives you feels when you walk through a certain area and there's this music playing that you're like,
Notice that these two mention experience and feeling. So it is that you do look at aesthetics first when you think of the most memorable games, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you can have the most functional mechanical game with all these awesome mechanics, but they are not always the most memorable. Sometimes just looking for the experience and what you want the player to walk away with is more memorable and a better design, you could say, of a game. You two want to add anything?
No,
That's pretty good cover. That's pretty good, yeah.
I think a good example for this is like Myst, where really your only mechanic is clicking where you want to walk and clicking things. And even that alone, with just such a lack of mechanic where you only really have to do one thing, it's still a memorable game just by aesthetics alone.
Yeah. I agree too.
I've just been thinking about like Tabletop Simulator, where basically they just give you the mechanics, and it's up to you to do with it whatever you will. So it's kind of, it's like, I guess, like a sandbox feel where it's up to you to come, usually with friends, so you're getting the fellowship aesthetic, but also like, you kind of get whatever you want from it, depending on like what you put in is what you get out.
When it comes to sandboxes, right, it's like...
It's a sandbox game. I don't know, but you have a pretty good argument for it.
Yeah, yeah.
The player is interacting with it.
Yeah, because when you think...
You don't have an objective.
Like, no, but if you think, for example, the first one of the most recognized sandboxes, right, was Minecraft, right? When Minecraft came out, it was like, it's up to you, right, to make whatever you want out of the game, right? And yeah, it has so many mechanics that work together. It was like it's like a machine that just exploits dynamics that will give you aesthetics. Yeah, that's something like worth remembering and thinking about that. Perhaps that was the design's intentions, right? To like it goes back to like just making everything interact with everything, and that will somehow not completely random, right? Like he had to have some sort of like idea what he wanted to do. But yeah, like these games are extremely volatile, and they're like you can basically make anything with them. So yeah, sandboxes is like a special case that is really like interesting to tackle. Thank you.
Anyone just want to add anything to the conversations?
I think one good argument for focusing on experience would be like if all FPSs did boil down to the same mechanic, like just shooting. But if you don't differentiate it through your dynamics and aesthetics, then it's not going to come across to the player in any way.
Yeah, that's another really important thing to think about, right? That when you're making a game as a designer, your best interest is not to use copy and genre, but to create something innovative that your players might like, right? But that's what we're trying to make. Otherwise, the perfect game will be just copying any game that was successful, right? So, yeah, and a really good way to look at this, right, is to look at the mechanics, right? Like, going back to looking at the mechanics first, you look at a game, you decompose it back to its core mechanics, and you think, what mechanics can I add to this game, and which I can subtract, even, and see how would that create new dynamics that will eventually change the aesthetics, right? So yeah, that's a really great comment. That's all I got for today. We have 20 more minutes.
20, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
3:40. Sean, Ryan, anything? Or? No, I think that was great. Thanks guys for coming, and feel free to come and ask anything if you have any questions. Thanks.
You're free for early, unless you're staying here for the programming workshop then.
What is that?
yeah.
I think it's also, I think that one's player movement, just like Wednesday.
Greg, what's the programming workshop? The programming workshop?
Yes.